What happens when a Hollywood star known for her grace, charm, and carefully guarded privacy suddenly finds herself cornered on live television and decides not to smile her way out of it? What happens when a morning talk show built on tough questions pushes one step too far? This is the moment nobody expected. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to Live Narratives right now, like this video, and comment below with your first reaction, because what you're about to witness isn't just an interview, it's a turning point. The studio lights of The View burned a little brighter that morning, reflecting off the polished table where the host sat in a neat arc, coffee mugs steaming, cue cards stacked, smiles rehearsed. The audience buzzed with that familiar pre-show electricity, whispers, soft laughter, phones quickly tucked away as producers waved their hands. This was supposed to be a fun episode. The guest list promised glamour. And when Margot Robbie stepped onto the stage, the applause was immediate, warm, almost adoring. She walked out with effortless poise, wearing a tailored look that balanced Hollywood elegance with talk show casual. Her smile was easy, practiced but genuine. She waved, hugged the hosts, laughed at an off-mic joke. From the outside, everything looked perfect. This was Margot Robbie, America's favorite leading lady, box office gold, the woman who could charm an entire room without raising her voice. Across the table, Sunny Hostin adjusted her notes. Her expression was calm, focused, professional. Sunny had built a reputation on asking the questions others hesitated to voice. She wasn't there to play villain, but she wasn't there to play safe either. Producers loved that about her. Audiences respected it. And that morning, no one thought the balance would tip. The first few minutes unfolded exactly as expected. Light banter. Laughter about filming schedules. A quick joke about accents. Margot leaned back in her chair, relaxed, hands folded loosely in her lap. She spoke about her latest project, her voice smooth, eyes sparkling. The audience nodded along, clapping on cue. It was comfortable, familiar, almost forgettable. Then the tone shifted, so subtly at first that only the most attentive viewers would notice. Sunny leaned forward slightly, her smile tightening just a fraction. "Margot," she began, her voice still warm, "you've spoken before about the pressure placed on women in Hollywood. Beauty standards, expectations, the roles you're offered. Some critics say that even when actresses talk about empowerment, the industry still profits from selling an image. Do you ever feel like you're part of that contradiction?" The room changed. Not dramatically. No gasps yet, but the air grew heavier. Margot's smile paused. Just for a heartbeat. Long enough to matter. She answered diplomatically at first, choosing her words carefully. She spoke about nuance, about intention versus perception, about trying to create space for complex female stories. Her tone was thoughtful, controlled. The audience applauded politely. Crisis averted, it seemed. But Sunny wasn't done. Because, Sunny continued, glancing briefly at her card and then back up, there are people who feel that while you talk about challenging stereotypes, many of your most famous roles still reinforce them. That maybe the empowerment message gets lost. This time, the pause was longer. Margot's hands shifted on the table. Her shoulders straightened. The easy laughter from before didn't return. She looked directly at Sunny. Not offended, not angry, but alert. Fully present. As if something inside her had quietly clicked into place. "I think," Margot said slowly, "that assumes women can't choose complexity. Or contradiction. Or even beauty, without it being a trap." A murmur rippled through the audience. Someone in the front row nodded emphatically. A host down the table glanced from Sunny to Margot, sensing the undercurrent. Sunny tilted her head. "But isn't it fair to ask whether Hollywood listens more when empowerment still looks marketable?" That was the moment. The invisible line. Margot inhaled, deeper this time. When she spoke again, her voice carried a new weight, still calm, but firmer, edged with something raw and personal. "I'm listening to the way that question is framed," she said, eyes steady. "And I want to be clear because it's important. Women aren't symbols. We're people. And the idea that any woman who succeeds in a visible way is somehow responsible for fixing an entire industry, that's a burden we don't put on men." The applause was instant. Louder. Longer. It wasn't the polite clapping of a talk show audience anymore. It was reactive, emotional. The camera cut briefly to Sunny, whose expression flickered. Not defensive, but sharpened. Engaged. "So, you don't think there's accountability?" Sunny asked. "I think there's accountability," Margot replied. "I just think it should be shared. And I think conversations about empowerment should include listening, not just challenging." The tension now sat fully on the table, undeniable. The hosts shifted in their seats. Producers backstage exchanged looks. This wasn't on the rundown. This wasn't rehearsed. This was real. And as the audience leaned forward, sensing that something bigger was unfolding, one truth became clear. This interview was no longer about a movie or a message or even Hollywood itself. It was about control. About who gets to define a woman's voice on live television with millions watching. And the moment nobody expected was only just beginning. The applause faded, but the tension didn't. It lingered in the studio like a low hum, vibrating just beneath the surface. Margot Robbie leaned back slightly, her expression composed, but there was no mistaking the shift. This was no longer a promotional stop on a press tour. This was a conversation that had teeth. Sunny Hostin didn't look away. She let the silence breathe for a moment, the way season hosts do when they know the audience is hanging on every second. The camera caught the crowd, some faces lit with excitement, others tight with anticipation. A woman in the second row clasped her hands together. Somewhere off camera, a producer raised a finger, silently asking if Sunny wanted to pivot. She didn't. "I hear what you're saying," Sunny replied carefully, her tone measured but insistent. "But when you're one of the most influential actresses in the world, doesn't your voice carry more weight? People look to you. Young women look to you. Isn't that power something that comes with responsibility?" Margot's jaw tightened, just slightly. She nodded once, acknowledging the point, but not conceding it. "Influence isn't the same as obligation," she said. "And visibility doesn't mean I get to speak for everyone. I can speak for myself. I can choose projects that feel honest to me, but I can't and shouldn't be expected to represent every woman's experience or satisfy every critic's definition of empowerment." A ripple of applause followed, mixed with a few audible mms from the crowd. One of the co-hosts shifted, trying to lighten the mood with a small smile, but it didn't land. The energy had moved past comfort. Sunny folded her hands together. But critics would argue that when stars push back on these questions, it can feel dismissive, as if the concerns themselves aren't valid. Margot's eyes softened, but her voice didn't weaken. "I don't think the concerns are invalid," she said. "I think they're incomplete, and sometimes unfairly personal." The word personal hung in the air. For the first time since the segment began, Margot glanced briefly toward the audience, then back to the table. Her posture remained elegant, but there was a guardedness now, a sense that she was choosing honesty over polish. "There's a narrative," she continued, "that if a woman succeeds within a system, she must be endorsing every flaw of that system. That she owes something more than her work, her integrity, her choices. And that narrative can be exhausting." The camera cut to Sunny. Her brow furrowed, not in anger, but concentration. "Exhausting for you," Sunny said. "But what about the women who don't get the opportunities you do? Who feel the industry only listens when the message comes from someone already celebrated?" A soft gasp escaped somewhere in the crowd. This was the question, sharp, pointed, impossible to ignore. Margot didn't answer right away. She looked down at her hands, then back up, meeting Sunny's gaze head-on. When she spoke, her voice was quieter, but somehow that made it hit harder. "I came from a place where nothing was guaranteed," she said. "I wasn't born into power. I worked. I auditioned. I was told no more times than I can count. And I don't forget that. But I also don't believe that tearing down women who made it helps the ones who haven't." The audience erupted into applause, this time louder than before. A few people stood instinctively, then sat back down, unsure if it was appropriate yet. The energy was no longer neutral. It was choosing sides. Sunny exhaled, nodding slowly. No one's asking you to be torn down, she said. But conversation requires discomfort, and sometimes accountability feels uncomfortable. Margot's eyes flashed, not with anger, but resolve. Accountability is important, she agreed. But so is context, and compassion, and recognizing when questions stop being about progress and start being about pressure. That landed. One of the hosts glanced toward the control room. Another adjusted her microphone. The audience was unusually quiet now, listening with an intensity that bordered on reverence. Sunny leaned back slightly, studying Margot for a moment. So, where do you draw the line? She asked. Between fair critique and unfair pressure? Margot answered without hesitation. When the conversation stops seeing me as a human being, she said. When it turns my work into a symbol instead of a story. When it assumes that if I don't say exactly the right thing, in exactly the right way, I've failed someone. Her voice wavered, just barely, enough for the audience to feel it. I care deeply about women, she added. About progress. About change. But I also care about honesty. And sometimes honesty means saying, I'm doing my best, and that has to be enough. For a split second, Sunny didn't respond. Then she nodded, slowly, thoughtfully. That's fair, she said. But you understand why people ask. I do, Margot replied. I just wish they listened to the answers. The studio went silent. No applause. No murmurs. Just a collective intake of breath, as if everyone watching understood they were witnessing something rare. Not a celebrity sparring match. Not a viral soundbite. But a moment where two powerful voices were no longer performing for the camera. They were confronting something deeper. And as the host prepared to respond, and the audience waited to see whether this conversation would cool or combust, it became clear. The most unexpected part of this moment hadn't even arrived yet. The silence broke with the faint rustle of cue cards. Sunny Hostin glanced down at the table, then back up, her expression unreadable. The audience sensed it instantly, that internal calculation. Pivot or push. Ease the tension or lean into it. The producers offstage were likely holding their breath. Sunny chose to lean in. You're right, she said slowly. Listening matters. But so does challenging power when we see it. And whether you like it or not, Margot, your power. The word landed heavier than any accusation. Margot Robbie didn't blink. If anything, she straightened, as though she'd been waiting for that sentence all along. I don't reject that, she replied. What I reject is the idea that power means perfection, or that it means silence unless I get everything right. A low murmur rolled through the crowd. Someone whispered, wow. Another shook their head in disbelief. This wasn't how daytime television usually unfolded. Sunny crossed her legs, folding one arm across her body. But when you choose certain roles, she pressed, roles that still center male gaze, still profit from conventional beauty, don't you worry that your message gets diluted? There it was, the sharpest edge yet. Margot's lips pressed together. For the first time, something flickered across her face that looked dangerously close to frustration. Not explosive. Controlled. Contained. I worry, she said, all the time. About everything. About whether I'm saying too much. Or not enough. About whether people will hear what I mean, or decide what I mean for me. She paused, eyes scanning the audience before returning to Sunny. But I also worry about a culture where women are only celebrated when they fit into a very specific moral box, where complexity is punished instead of explored. The audience applauded again, louder now, more confident. This wasn't awkward anymore. It was electric. Sunny raised an eyebrow. So you're saying the criticism itself can be limiting? I'm saying, Margot responded, her voice firm, that sometimes the criticism demands a version of womanhood that's just as narrow as the stereotypes we claim to fight. That drew a reaction, an audible gasp, followed by clapping that spread row by row. One of the co-hosts shifted forward, mouth slightly open, as if debating whether to intervene. She didn't. Sunny's tone softened, but only slightly. Do you ever think about how your silence on certain issues is interpreted? Margot exhaled, a slow, measured breath. All the time. The simplicity of the answer stunned the room. But silence, she continued, isn't always absence. Sometimes it's processing. Sometimes it's choosing not to speak over others. And sometimes it's self-preservation. The last word hit hardest. The camera cut to the audience. Women nodding, men sitting back thoughtfully, a few people visibly emotional. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This was personal. Sunny studied Margot closely. Self-preservation from what? Margot hesitated. Just long enough. From being consumed, she said quietly. From becoming a projection instead of a person. From waking up one day and realizing that no matter what I do, it will never be enough. The studio went completely still. Even Sunny seemed momentarily taken aback by the vulnerability in that answer. She leaned back, uncrossing her arms, her posture less confrontational now. That sounds heavy, Sunny admitted. It is, Margot said. And I know I'm fortunate. I know I have privilege. But privilege doesn't cancel pressure. And visibility doesn't erase humanity. The applause that followed was thunderous, longer than any before it. This time people stood. Not all of them, but enough to change the energy in the room entirely. Sunny nodded, slowly, thoughtfully. I appreciate your honesty, she said. But you have to understand, these questions come from a place of wanting better. Margot met her gaze. So, do my answers. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Two women, two perspectives, neither backing down, neither attacking. Then Sunny spoke again, but her voice had changed. Let me ask you something different, she said. Have you ever felt misrepresented in these conversations? Margot didn't smile, but she didn't hesitate either. Yes, she said. Often. The audience leaned in as one. Because sometimes, Margot continued, it feels like people don't want dialogue. They want a verdict. And once they've decided who you are, everything you say gets filtered through that decision. Sunny absorbed that, nodding slowly. That's a fair criticism. A co-host finally jumped in with a nervous laugh, trying to lighten the atmosphere, but it fell flat. The moment was too charged to defuse with humor. Margot glanced briefly at the camera, then back to the table. I believe in progress, she said. But I also believe it doesn't come from public trials. It comes from real conversations like this one, when we allow room for discomfort and empathy. The audience erupted again. This time, the applause felt less reactive and more resolute. Sunny smiled faintly. You're very good at this, she said. Margot smiled back, but it was tired. Honest. I'm just being myself, she replied. And in that exchange, quiet, unguarded, and unexpectedly profound, it became clear that something had shifted. The conversation had crossed a line it couldn't uncross. Because now it wasn't about questions anymore. It was about truth. And what happens next would surprise everyone watching. The shift was unmistakable now. What had begun as a probing interview had transformed into something far more intimate and far more volatile. The audience could feel it. The hosts could feel it. Even the cameras seemed to linger longer, tighter, as if afraid to miss a single flicker of emotion. Sunny Hostin rested her hands on the table, no longer gripping her notes. Truth, she repeated softly. That's a powerful word on a show like this. Margot Robbie nodded. It should be. There was no defiance in her tone anymore, just clarity. And somehow, that made it more dangerous. Sunny leaned forward again, but this time her voice wasn't sharp. It was deliberate. Let me be honest with you, she said. Part of my job is to push. To ask what people at home are thinking but don't get to say. And sometimes that means pressing someone who seems untouchable. A murmur of agreement moved through the crowd. Margot listened, eyes steady. I understand that, she replied. What I struggle with is the idea that being visible makes you untouchable. It doesn't. It just makes you watched. That line landed hard. The audience reaction wasn't applause this time. It was a low, collective sound of recognition. Heads nodded. Someone whispered, That's true. Sunny exhaled. Do you feel watched right now? Margot didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was softer than it had been all morning. Yes. The studio fell silent again. Not just by the cameras, Margot continued, but by expectations. By people waiting to decide whether I pass or fail this moment. Whether I say the right thing. Whether I deserve the space I take up. She gestured subtly toward the audience, toward the hosts, toward the unseen millions watching from home. And that pressure, she said, does something to you. It makes you cautious. It makes you rehearse your humanity. Sunny's expression changed. Something like empathy crossed her face. That wasn't my intention, she said. I know, Margot replied gently. But intention doesn't erase impact. That was the sentence that shifted the room entirely. One of the co-hosts inhaled sharply. Another glance toward the producers, eyes wide. This wasn't scripted. This wasn't safe. This was the kind of exchange that people would rewind, clip, argue over. Sunny sat back, absorbing it. So, what would you want moments like this to look like? She asked. If you could design the conversation. Margot thought for a moment. The pause felt heavy, meaningful. I'd want curiosity instead of conclusion, she said. I'd want space for contradiction. And I'd want the understanding that growth doesn't always look neat on camera. A wave of applause followed, steady, heartfelt. Sunny nodded slowly. That's fair, she said. But let me push once more. The audience tensed again. This was becoming a pattern. Advance, retreat, advance. There are people watching right now, Sunny said, who feel unheard, who feel the system doesn't change unless someone at the top forces it to. They see you and think, if not her, then who? Margot's eyes glistened. Not with tears, but intensity. I don't want to be a symbol people wait on, she said. I want to be part of a movement where many voices speak, where no single woman carries the weight of everyone else's hope or disappointment. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. The audience reacted instantly. Applause rose again, mixed with audible emotion. Someone in the back wiped their eyes. Another person whispered, she's right. Sunny's shoulders dropped. The fight had drained out of her posture. That's a lot to carry, she admitted. It is, Margot said. And I carry it because I care. But caring doesn't mean consenting to be reduced. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Sunny did something unexpected. She turned slightly toward the audience. What you're seeing right now, she said, isn't an argument. It's a collision of expectations. She turned back to Margot. And I think it's important. Margot nodded. So, do I. The co-hosts finally relaxed, some smiling, some visibly shaken. The segment had gone far beyond its allotted time, but no one rushed it. No cue cards waved. No commercial break slammed in. Sunny clasped her hands together. I want to say this, she said. Even when I push, it's not about tearing you down. It's about challenging systems that hurt people. Margot met her gaze. And I want to say, I'm not your enemy in that fight. That line drew the loudest reaction yet. The audience stood again, this time without hesitation. Applause filled the studio, echoing off the walls, sustained and emotional. It wasn't about sides anymore. It was about release. Sunny smiled, small, genuine. I believe you. Margot smiled back. Not tired this time. Relieved. As the applause finally faded, the energy in the room had changed completely. What began as tension had transformed into something raw, unresolved, but real. And everyone watching could feel it. Because moments like this don't end when the cameras cut. They follow you. They ignite conversations at dinner tables, on timelines, in comment sections. They force people to pick apart every word, every pause, every look. And as the show prepared to move on, as producers finally signaled the transition, one truth hung unmistakably in the air. This wasn't going to stay in the studio. Not even close. The cameras eventually pulled back. The applause faded into something softer, almost reverent. A producer's voice finally broke through the earpieces, guiding the show toward its next segment. Smiles returned. Thank yous were exchanged. The audience was told they were going to commercial. But everyone in that studio knew the truth. Something irreversible had already happened. As Margot Robbie stood up from her chair, the audience gave her one last wave of applause, unprompted, sustained, emotional. She nodded in appreciation, pressing her hand briefly to her chest, not as a performance, but as acknowledgement. Sunny Hostin stood too. The two women shared a quiet, unscripted moment, a brief, mutual nod that said more than words ever could. The cameras cut, and yet the moment didn't end. Backstage, whispers spread instantly. Crew members replayed lines in their heads. Producers glanced at monitors already lighting up with alerts. Phones buzzed. Group chats exploded. Someone muttered, "This is going everywhere." Within minutes, clips began circulating online. Not the loud parts. Not the applause. The silences. Margot's pause before saying yes when asked if she felt watched. Her quiet admission about self-preservation. Sunny's shift from challenger to listener. On social media, the reaction was immediate and divided. Some hailed it as one of the most honest exchanges daytime television had seen in years. Others accused the show of pushing too hard or not hard enough. Commentators froze frames, dissected body language, debated tone. Headlines followed fast. Margot Robbie shuts down talk show narrative. Sunny Hostin sparks unexpectedly raw exchange. Viewers say this wasn't an interview. It was a reckoning. Fans shared personal stories in the comments. Women wrote about pressure, about being watched, about being expected to represent more than themselves at work, at home, everywhere. Men chimed in too, some defensively, some thoughtfully, many admitting they'd never considered that kind of visibility as a burden. The clip trended, not because it was explosive, but because it was uncomfortable and honest. Later that evening, a short statement appeared from the show, carefully worded, respectful, emphasizing the importance of dialogue. Sunny Hostin reposted a clip with a single line, "Conversations matter." Margot didn't post anything. And somehow, that silence spoke just as loudly. Entertainment panels debated it for days. Was it fair? Was it necessary? Was it overdue? Psychologists weighed in on public scrutiny. Media critics praised the lack of theatrics. Others warned that moments like this reveal how hungry audiences are for authenticity and how unprepared television often is to handle it. But beyond the commentary, beyond the think pieces and reaction videos, something deeper lingered. People remembered how it felt to watch, like witnessing two realities collide in real time, like seeing the polished surface crack just enough to show something real underneath. Not a winner, not a loser, just truth, exchanged under studio lights. And that's why this moment didn't disappear after the broadcast ended. Because moments like this don't ask you to cheer. They ask you to reflect. So now, the question turns to you. Did Margot Robbie say what needed to be said? Did Sunny Hostin push too far? Or not far enough? Was this accountability or pressure disguised as conversation? Tell us what you think in the comments. And if you want more cinematic, intense, behind-the-moment stories like this, stories that pull you inside the room and let you feel every second, make sure you subscribe to Live Narratives right now. Because sometimes the moments nobody expects are the ones we can't stop talking about.